Behavioural economics on a post-it number 36, the trust game. This is another economic game that indicates that people behave cooperatively, or often behave cooperatively towards each other, rather than just, acting upon their pure selfish egoism, both in the expectation of what others might do and in what people then actually do. I think that a lot of these things are linked intimately, intrinsically to the notion of reciprocity, positive reciprocity. In the case of the trust game, I think, and reciprocity is a huge subject, of which something that I've got a very deep interest in, and something that I wrote a whole book on a couple of years ago. I'm going to talk a little bit about reciprocity in a later post-it, in one of the post-its videos towards the end of this series. So I'll leave that sort of concept hanging a little bit at the moment. So the trust game, let me just describe this to you. This is a version of the trust game again. 2 players again, as there were in what was it? It was the, not the public goods game, was it? It was the centipede game that I presented to you in the previous post-it note. 2 players again, both called Peter and Paul. Now, in the trust game, you can have a situation where you've got Peter and you're giving him a choice, really. And he knows all of the payoffs that are involved in the potential payoffs that are consequent on both of the choices that he can make, both of the options that he could choose here. So Peter could either what's called hold the game at this point, at which point the game would stop. If he holds the game, he won't receive anything. He'll receive no pounds. Let's say that this is in pounds again. But Paul will also receive nothing. So they'll both receive nothing if Peter holds. But Peter could play. And if Peter plays, then the decision is handed over to Paul. Right? And at that point, Paul's got a decision to make, whereby he could either keep. If he keeps, then Peter would have to actually lose £1, and Paul would keep £5, or he would gain £5. But if Paul returns, then both Peter and Paul would both get £2, right? Now you can see that according to pure selfish egoism, then Paul should really keep at this point, shouldn't he? The game stops at this point. Peter has no opportunity to retaliate. Paul would get 5 rather than 2 if he keeps. But Paul does know that if he were to do that, then Peter would lose £1 rather than gain £2. And Peter knew about these possible payoffs when he decided to either hold or play. Now, if he played, then Peter must be assuming that Paul would reciprocate, would return that kind action, if you like, with let's say a kind action of his own, or at least a non-selfishly egoistic action of his own, by returning. So Peter expects Paul to return, and as a consequence, lose some money himself from what he could get if he kept. Right? So, according to pure selfish egoism, Peter would expect Paul to keep, and therefore Peter would hold at this point. Right? However, when you actually play out this game, quite a lot of people in Peter's position do play, and quite a lot of people in Paul's position do return as a consequence, right? So Peter has the expectation that Paul will not be behaving purely selfishly, egoistically if he plays, and that often happens. And indeed, Paul does not, people in Paul's position often do not behave purely selfishly, egoistically when Peter does in fact play and hand the decision over to them, right? So this is all I've written here, really. So when we have this situation where we observe that Peter plays and Paul returns, then both parties, if they were to do that, do not behave in accordance with what many people think are the fundamental assumptions of rational choice theory, i.e. selfish egoism. And indeed, in empirical observation, that is often observed. Not with everybody, but it is often observed with a significant number of people. Okay, so that's behavioural economics on a post-it number 36, was it? Let me just check. Number 36, the trust game.